When my mother-in-law hired a private investigator to catch me cheating, she thought she'd finally get the proof she needed to destroy my marriage. What she didn't expect was that her own hired detective would become my greatest ally, armed with evidence that would turn her malicious campaign completely upside down. Sometimes the truth has a way of finding the light, even when it's buried under months of carefully crafted lies. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The first whisper reached me on a Tuesday morning in November, carried on the crisp Oregon air through the half-open window of Miller's coffee shop. I was ordering my usual vanilla latte when I caught fragments of conversation from the table behind me. Voices I recognized from the Riverside Elementary parent-teacher conferences. "Poor Daniel. He has no idea what's really going on while he's at work," one woman murmured, her tone dripping with manufactured sympathy. Patricia showed me the photos herself, Lauren coming and going at all hours, meeting strange men and parking. Lots. My blood turned ice cold as I realized they were discussing me. Lauren Hayes, devoted wife of 8 years, mother to Chloe and Tyler, marketing coordinator who worked late because campaigns didn't sleep. The Lauren who had never so much as flirted with another man since meeting Daniel at that Portland coffee festival back in college. I remained frozen at the counter, my credit card suspended midair as the barista waited patiently. The conversation continued behind me, each word landing like a physical blow. "And the way she dresses for work these days," another voice chimed in. "Much too provocative for a mother of 2. Patricia says she's been tracking Lauren's schedule and there are hours unaccounted for almost every week." Patricia Brennan, my mother-in-law, the woman who had never quite accepted that her precious only son had married someone from California, someone who hadn't grown up in their tight-knit Riverside community. The retired school principal who still commanded respect and fear in equal measure throughout our small Oregon town. I completed my transaction with shaking hands and retreated to a corner table. My appetite for coffee completely vanished. Through the window, I could see the autumn leaves falling steadily from the maple trees that gave our neighborhood its name. Maple Ridge had felt like home for 8 years, a place where Tyler could ride his bike safely and Chloe could walk to her friend's house without worry. Now it felt like enemy territory. My phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie Walsh, my closest friend since we'd met at Tyler's first soccer practice 5 years ago. "Can you talk? Something weird happened at the grocery store today." I stepped outside into the November chill and called her immediately. Stephanie's voice was tight with concern when she answered. "Lauren, honey, I need to ask you something, and please don't take this the wrong way. Are you having problems at home? With Daniel?" The question hit me like a slap. "What? No, why would you ask that?" "Because Mrs. Henderson cornered me by the frozen food section and started asking very pointed questions about your marriage. She wanted to know if you'd confided in me about being unhappy, if you'd mentioned meeting anyone new. She made it sound like she was concerned about you, but something felt off." Mrs. Henderson lived 2 streets over from Patricia. They played bridge together every Thursday and attended the same church. The invisible network of Riverside's longtime residents, spreading information faster than any social media platform ever could. "Stephanie, I need to tell you something." I found myself scanning the parking lot, paranoid about who might overhear. "I think Patricia is spreading rumors about me having an affair." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "That's insane," Stephanie finally said, but her voice lacked the immediate outrage I'd expected. "Although, now that you mention it, Carol Jensen made some strange comments at book club last week. Asked if I'd noticed you seeming distant lately, if you were spending more time away from home." Carol Jensen, Patricia's next-door neighbor and closest confidant. The picture was becoming clearer, and it made me nauseous. I drove home through streets that suddenly felt foreign, wondering how many of my neighbors had heard whispered speculation about my fidelity. The house on Maple Ridge Drive that Daniel and I had saved for 2 years to buy, the place where we'd brought both our babies home from the hospital, now felt exposed and vulnerable. Daniel's truck was already in the driveway when I arrived, which was unusual for a Tuesday afternoon. He typically didn't finish at the city planning office until after 5. I found him in the kitchen, standing at the island with a cup of coffee, and an expression I couldn't quite read. "Hey," I said carefully, setting my purse on the counter. "You're home early." "Mom called," he said without looking up. "She wanted to check in, see how we're doing." The casual tone didn't fool me. Patricia never called just to check in. Every conversation with her had an agenda, usually one that involved subtle criticism of my housekeeping, my parenting, or my career priorities. "What did she want to know?" I asked, opening the refrigerator to give my hands something to do. "She's worried about you. Says you've seemed stressed lately. Distracted. She mentioned you've been working late a lot more often." I turned to face him, studying his familiar features for signs of suspicion. Daniel had his father's gentle brown eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. Right now, those eyes held a confusion that made my heart ache. "I have been working late," I said honestly. "We're launching 3 major campaigns before Christmas. I've told you about the Reynolds account and the Cascade Health Project." "I know," he said quickly. "I told her that. But she asked some other questions too." The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the afternoon light streaming through our yellow curtains doing nothing to warm the chill that had settled between us. "What kind of questions, Daniel?" He set down his coffee cup and finally met my eyes. "She wanted to know if I'd noticed changes in your routine, if you'd mentioned making new friends at work, if you seemed different when you came home from those late nights." Each question felt like Patricia's voice speaking through our kitchen, poisoning the sanctuary of our home with her insinuations. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her she was being ridiculous," Daniel said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I told her you're the most dedicated wife and mother I know, and that she had no business questioning your character." The fact that he'd had to defend me at all felt like a betrayal, even though I knew it wasn't his fault. Patricia had been planting seeds of doubt, and some part of Daniel was fertile ground for her manipulation. "But," I prompted, because I could hear the unspoken qualifier in his tone. Daniel ran his hands through his dark hair, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when he was wrestling with something difficult. "But then she mentioned seeing you at Sunset Park last Thursday afternoon. She was there with her walking group, and she said you were sitting in your car, talking on the phone for over an hour. She said you looked upset." The memory came flooding back. I had been at Sunset Park last Thursday, but not for any reason Patricia could twist into infidelity. I'd been on a conference call with a client in New York, dealing with a crisis that threatened to derail their entire campaign. I'd pulled into the park because the cell reception was better there, and I'd stayed in the car because November in Oregon wasn't exactly conducive to outdoor phone meetings. "I was working," I said. "The Hartman Group was threatening to pull their account. I spent 2 hours on calls trying to save it." "I believe you," Daniel said, and I could tell he was trying to convince himself as much as me. "But Mom seemed to know a lot of details. She said you were there for over an hour, that you seemed emotional during the call." The implication was clear. Patricia hadn't just happened to see me at the park. She'd been watching me, taking note of my whereabouts and my behavior. The realization sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the Oregon weather. "Daniel, your mother is following me." He shook his head immediately. "That's crazy. She's not following you. She just happened to be at the park with her walking group." "At 3:30 on a Thursday afternoon? When does her walking group ever meet at 3:30? The question hung between us, and I watched Daniel's face as he processed what I was suggesting. His mother, the woman who had raised him with strict moral codes and unwavering principles, was potentially stalking his wife. "Maybe she got the time wrong," he said weakly, Or maybe she's been keeping track of my schedule and positioning herself to observe me. How else would she know I've been working late more often? How else would she have specific details about my whereabouts on random afternoons? Daniel's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and his expression tightened. She wants to have dinner this weekend. All of us. She says it's been too long since we've had a family meal together. The timing felt deliberate. Patricia wanted to see us together, to observe our interaction and look for cracks in our marriage that she could exploit further. Fine, I said, surprising Daniel with my quick agreement. Let's have dinner with your mother. I have nothing to hide. That evening, after Tyler finished his homework and Chloe completed her debate team preparation, I sat in our bedroom and tried to make sense of what was happening. Patricia had never been my biggest fan, but this felt like more than disapproval. This felt like a calculated campaign to destroy my marriage. I thought back to Daniel's last birthday party, 2 months ago. Patricia had insisted on hosting it, at her house on Hillcrest Drive, and I'd spent the afternoon helping in her kitchen while she held court with her longtime friends. I'd overheard fragments of conversation that day, too, discussions about marriages that had failed, women who had been unfaithful, the importance of staying vigilant about threats to family stability. At the time, I'd assumed it was general gossip. Now I wondered if Patricia had been laying groundwork, preparing her social circle for the story she planned to spread about me. My laptop sat open on the dresser, and I found myself researching private investigators in the Portland area. If Patricia was determined to find evidence of an affair that didn't exist, maybe I needed professional help to document what was really happening. The idea felt paranoid and excessive, but so did hiring someone to follow your daughter-in-law around a small Oregon town. Daniel emerged from the bathroom, his face weary in a way that made him look older than his 34 years. I keep thinking about what you said, he admitted, settling onto his side of the bed. About Mom keeping track of your schedule. It does seem like she knows an awful lot about your daily routine. I'm not imagining this, Daniel. She's been watching me, and now she's spreading rumors based on perfectly innocent activities that she's twisting into something sinister. But why would she do that? What would she gain from destroying our marriage? It was a question I'd been asking myself all afternoon. Patricia had never been openly hostile toward me. Her disapproval had always been subtle, delivered through backhanded compliments and gentle suggestions that I could be a better wife and mother if I just tried harder. Maybe she thinks you'd be better off without me, I said quietly. Maybe she's never forgiven you for marrying someone who didn't grow up here, someone she couldn't control. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ceiling fan that rotated slowly above our bed. She did ask me once if I ever regretted not marrying Jennifer Mills, he said finally. Jennifer Mills, his high school girlfriend who had stayed in Riverside, married a local contractor, and produced 3 children while maintaining the kind of traditional domestic life that Patricia valued above all else. When did she ask you that? A few months ago. She made it sound casual, like she was just curious. But she brought up how happy Jennifer seemed, how devoted she was to her family, how she'd never had any interest in working outside the home. The criticism was subtle, but unmistakable. Jennifer Mills represented everything Patricia wanted in a daughter-in-law, and I represented everything she feared about modern women who prioritized careers alongside family. I reached for Daniel's hand in the darkness, needing the physical connection to ground me in what was real and true about our marriage. I love you, I said simply. I love our children. I love the life we've built together. I would never do anything to jeopardize that. I know, he said, squeezing my fingers. But Mom's not going to let this go. You know how she gets when she's convinced she's right about something. That was exactly what I was afraid of. Patricia Brennan, retired educator and pillar of the Riverside community, had the determination of a woman who had spent 30 years managing difficult students and uncooperative parents. If she had decided I was a threat to her son's happiness, she would pursue that conviction with methodical precision until she found a way to prove herself right. The next morning brought the first direct confrontation. I was dropping Tyler off at Riverside Elementary when Patricia appeared beside my car as I prepared to leave the parking lot. She'd timed it perfectly, catching me when I couldn't avoid her without making a scene in front of other parents and teachers who knew us both. "Lauren, dear," she said, her voice carrying the artificial sweetness that always preceded her most cutting observations. "I was hoping we could have a quick chat." "Of course," I replied, though every instinct told me to drive away immediately. Patricia leaned against my car door, effectively trapping me in the driver's seat. She was wearing her best concerned neighbor expression, the one she'd perfected during her years as a school principal dealing with troubled families. "I've been worried about you lately," she began, her gray eyes scanning my face for reaction. "You seem so stressed, so busy with work. I hope you're not taking on more than you can handle." The word seemed supportive, but the undertone was unmistakable. She was probing, looking for signs of guilt or defensiveness that she could interpret as confirmation of her suspicions. "I appreciate your concern, Patricia, but I'm managing everything just fine." "Are you, though?" She tilted her head, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the November wind. "Because Daniel mentioned you've been working very late recently, and I've noticed you seem to spend quite a bit of time away from home during the day as well." There it was. The admission that she'd been monitoring my comings and goings, delivered with the casual confidence of someone who believed she had every right to investigate her daughter-in-law's activities. "My job requires flexibility," I said carefully. "Sometimes I work late, sometimes I have meetings during the day. That's normal for anyone in marketing." "Of course it is," Patricia agreed, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's just that, in my experience, when a wife starts changing her patterns, spending more time away from her family, it's often a sign that something else is competing for her attention." The accusation was subtle but clear. She was suggesting that my work schedule was a cover for an extramarital relationship, and she was delivering this insinuation in the parking lot of my son's elementary school, where any number of people could overhear. "Patricia, I think you're misunderstanding the demands of my career." "Perhaps," she said, straightening up from the car. "But you can understand why a mother would be concerned about her son's happiness. Daniel deserves a wife who's fully committed to their marriage, don't you think?" Before I could respond, she walked away toward the school building, leaving me sitting in my car with my heart racing and my hands shaking with suppressed anger. She'd delivered her message with surgical precision, planting doubt while maintaining plausible deniability. If I complained to Daniel about the conversation, she could claim she'd merely expressed concern about my work-life balance. I drove to Northwest Marketing Solutions feeling like I was navigating through a minefield. Every interaction, every routine activity was now subject to Patricia's scrutiny and creative interpretation. The client meeting I'd scheduled for that afternoon at Pine Valley Community Center would probably be reported as a suspicious rendezvous. The late night I'd planned to spend finishing the Cascade Health presentation would become evidence of marital neglect. At the office, I found myself confiding in Brian Foster, my colleague and the closest thing I had to an ally in the professional world that Patricia viewed with such suspicion. "She actually confronted you in the school parking lot?" Brian asked, his voice incredulous. "That's harassment, Lauren. You should document this." "Document what exactly? That my mother-in-law thinks I work too much? Document that she's stalking you and spreading rumors about your fidelity. That's not normal behavior, even for an overbearing in-law." Brian was right, but the situation felt too delicate for legal intervention. Patricia held too much social power in Riverside, and any aggressive response from me would likely be interpreted as proof of guilt rather than righteous indignation. That weekend's family dinner at Patricia's house on Hillcrest Drive felt like walking into a carefully orchestrated trap. She'd invited Daniel's aunt and uncle, longtime family friends, and even Jennifer Mills with her husband and children. The message was clear. She wanted witnesses to observe our family dynamic and draw their own conclusions about the state of our marriage. I arrived dressed conservatively in a navy sweater and slacks, my hair pulled back in a simple style that couldn't be interpreted as an attempt to attract attention. Patricia greeted me with air kisses and compliments on my appearance that somehow managed to sound like criticisms. "You look lovely, dear. So nice to see you making an effort for family gatherings." The implication that I normally didn't make an effort was subtle but unmistakable to everyone present. Chloe and Tyler, blissfully, unaware of the undercurrents, ran off to play with Jennifer's children while the adults settled into Patricia's formal living room. Throughout the evening, I felt like a specimen under a microscope. Patricia steered conversations toward topics that would allow her to highlight my perceived shortcomings as a wife and mother. She asked pointed questions about my work schedule, my hobbies, my friendships, each inquiry designed to paint a picture of a woman whose priorities lay outside her family. "Lauren works such long hours," she mentioned to Jennifer during dinner. "I worry that she's missing out on so many precious moments with the children." Jennifer, who had clearly been briefed on the evening's agenda, nodded sympathetically. "It must be so hard to balance everything. I've always felt grateful that Mark's income allows me to focus entirely on our family." The comparison was explicit and cutting. Jennifer represented devotion and traditional values, while I represented modern selfishness and misplaced priorities. Daniel tried to defend me, mentioning my contributions to our household income and my dedication to both career and family. But his efforts felt half-hearted, and I could see that Patricia's constant insinuations were taking their toll on his confidence in our marriage. The breaking point came when Patricia suggested that Tyler seemed to be struggling in school because he lacked consistent maternal attention at home. The accusation was baseless and cruel, and it finally pushed me past my limit. "Tyler is an excellent student," I said firmly. "His teachers have nothing but positive things to say about his progress and behavior." "Of course they do," Patricia replied smoothly. "Teachers are always diplomatic, but I've spent enough time in educational settings to recognize when a child is experiencing stress at home." The room fell silent, and I realized that everyone present was waiting to see how I would respond to this direct attack on my parenting. Daniel looked uncomfortable but didn't immediately come to my defense, and that hesitation spoke volumes about how successfully Patricia had undermined his trust in me. I excused myself to the bathroom and found myself staring at my reflection in Patricia's guest powder room, trying to calm my racing heart and plan my next move. I could hear muffled conversation from the dining room, and I had no doubt that my temporary absence was being dissected and analyzed for signs of guilt or instability. When I returned to the table, the conversation had shifted to holiday plans, but the damage was done. Patricia had successfully demonstrated to her audience that I was defensive, volatile, and potentially unfit as a wife and mother. The seeds of doubt she'd been planting throughout our community would find fertile ground in the minds of everyone who had witnessed the evening's performance. Driving home later that night, with Daniel silent in the passenger seat and the children chattering about their evening with Jennifer's kids, I realized that Patricia's campaign against me was entering a new phase. She was no longer content with subtle innuendo and carefully placed rumors. She was prepared to make direct accusations and public demonstrations of my alleged inadequacies. "We need to talk," Daniel said quietly after we'd gotten the children settled for the night. I followed him to our bedroom, dreading the conversation that I knew would determine the future of our marriage. Patricia's poison was working, and I could see in Daniel's eyes that he was beginning to question everything he thought he knew about me. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he said, sitting heavily on the edge of our bed. "Mom's concerns, the things people are saying around town, the way you reacted tonight. It all feels like too much to be completely baseless." The words hit me like physical blows. My husband, the man I'd loved and trusted for 8 years, was admitting that he was more inclined to believe gossip and his mother's insinuations than his own wife's word. "What exactly are people saying around town?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Daniel looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "That you've been seen with someone, that your work schedule doesn't add up, that you've been acting differently, more secretive, more distant." "And you believe them?" "I don't want to believe them," he said quietly. "But Mom's not a liar, Lauren. She's not manipulative or vindictive. If she's this concerned, if she's going to the trouble of talking to people and asking questions, there must be something behind it." The naive faith in his mother's character would have been touching if it weren't so devastating to our marriage. Daniel couldn't see that Patricia was exactly as manipulative and vindictive as the situation required, and his blindness was giving her the power to destroy everything we'd built together. That night, as Daniel slept fitfully beside me, I made a decision that would change everything. If Patricia wanted to play detective, if she wanted to investigate my activities and spread rumors based on her twisted interpretations, then I would. Give her exactly what she was asking for. I would hire a real investigator, someone who could document not only my own innocence, but also Patricia's malicious behavior. The truth had a way of revealing itself when examined closely enough, and I was ready to shine a very bright light on everything that had been happening in the shadows of our small Oregon town. The Monday morning after Patricia's dinner party ambush, I sat in my car outside a nondescript office building in downtown Portland, staring at the brass nameplate that read, "Rodriguez Investigations, Discretion, Integrity, Results." The 40-minute drive from Riverside had given me time to question my decision a dozen times, but the memory of Daniel's doubt-filled eyes kept me from turning around. Marcus Rodriguez looked nothing like the private investigators I'd seen in movies. Instead of a rumpled coat and 5 o'clock shadow, he wore a crisp button-down shirt and spoke with the measured professionalism of someone who took his work seriously. His office was sparse but organized, with certificates on the wall and a coffee maker that looked like it had seen considerable use. "Tell me about your situation, Mrs. Hayes," he said, settling behind his desk with a notepad and pen. "What brings you here today?" I found myself struggling to explain without sounding paranoid or vindictive. How do you tell a stranger that your mother-in-law has launched what amounts to a character assassination campaign based on completely fabricated evidence? "My mother-in-law believes I'm having an affair," I began carefully. "She's been spreading rumors throughout our community, and now my husband is starting to believe them. The problem is, I'm not having an affair. I've never been unfaithful, never even considered it. But she's been following me, documenting my activities, and twisting innocent interactions into evidence of infidelity." Marcus nodded, making notes, without judgment. "What kind of evidence does she claim to have?" "She's seen me at various locations around town during work hours. She knows I've been working late more frequently. She's documented times when I've been away from home for what she considers suspicious periods. The thing is, everything she's observed has a completely legitimate explanation related to my job, but she's choosing to interpret it as proof of an affair." "And your husband believes her?" The question stung, but I forced myself to answer honestly. "He's conflicted. He says he doesn't want to believe it, but his mother has a lot of influence over him. She's positioning herself as the concerned parent trying to protect her son from a deceitful wife, and he's finding it hard to dismiss her concerns entirely." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me with eyes that had probably seen every variety of human deception and desperation. "What outcome are you hoping for, Mrs. Hayes? What would constitute success from your perspective?" I'd thought about this question during the drive to Portland, weighing my options and their potential consequences. I want documentation that proves my innocence. I want evidence that shows exactly what I've been doing during the times Patricia claims I was engaging in suspicious behavior. And if possible, I want proof that she's been stalking me and deliberately spreading false information about my marriage. That's certainly achievable, Marcus said. The challenge will be doing it without creating more problems for your family relationships. Investigating a family member, even one who's behaving badly, can have lasting consequences. The consequences of doing nothing are worse, I replied. My marriage is deteriorating because of lies. My children are starting to sense tension they don't understand. My reputation in the community is being destroyed by rumors that have no basis in reality. I can't fight shadows and whispers with nothing but my word. Marcus quoted his daily rate and explained his methods. He would conduct surveillance to document my actual activities, cross-reference them with Patricia's claims, and gather evidence of any inappropriate behavior on her part. He would be discreet, professional, and thorough. One more thing, he said as I prepared to leave. In my experience, people who are this determined to prove infidelity often have their own secrets. I'm not suggesting we investigate your mother-in-law's personal life, but be prepared for the possibility that her obsession with your alleged affair might stem from projections of her own guilt or paranoia. The comment stayed with me as I drove back to Riverside. Patricia had been widowed for 6 years, living alone in the house on Hillcrest Drive that she'd shared with Daniel's father. She filled her time with community activities, church committees, and social groups, but I'd never considered what her emotional life might look like, or whether her fixation on my marriage reflected her own loneliness or regrets. That afternoon, I implemented the first phase of my counter-strategy. I began documenting everything, every interaction with Patricia, every rumor I encountered, every suspicious glance or whispered conversation that seemed related to the affair allegations. I started a private journal, noting dates, times, locations, and witnesses for any incident that might be relevant to Marcus's investigation. The documentation proved more extensive than I'd anticipated. Over the next week, I recorded 3 separate encounters with community members who made oblique references to my situation or expressed concern about Daniel's welfare. I noted Patricia's presence at locations where I conducted business, including her appearance at the Riverside Public Library while I was meeting with a client, and her visit to Pine Valley Community Center on the same day I had scheduled a presentation there. Most disturbing was the pattern that emerged when I began paying closer attention to her behavior. Patricia wasn't simply observing me from a distance. She was actively positioning herself to witness my activities and then embellishing what she saw with fictional details that supported her narrative. On Thursday afternoon, I had a legitimate business meeting with Brian Foster at Miller's Coffee Shop to discuss the Cascade Health campaign. We sat at a corner table, laptops open, working through budget projections and timeline revisions. The meeting lasted 90 minutes and was entirely professional, but I noticed Patricia's car in the parking lot when I arrived, and again when I left. That evening, Daniel's aunt called with concerns that had clearly originated from Patricia. According to the second-hand report, I had been seen having an intimate lunch with a man, sitting close together, looking secretive and romantic. The coffee shop meeting with Brian had been transformed into a romantic tryst through Patricia's creative interpretation and strategic embellishment. "She's not just watching me," I told Marcus during our phone check-in that Friday. "She's creating fiction based on what she observes. Every legitimate interaction gets twisted into evidence of an affair." "That's actually helpful for our case," Marcus replied. "The more elaborate her stories become, the easier they are to disprove with objective evidence. I've been conducting my own surveillance this week, and I have detailed documentation of your actual activities. The contrast with her claims will be very revealing." Marcus had been thorough in his investigation. He'd photographed me entering and leaving Northwest Marketing Solutions, documented my client meetings, recorded the times I spent at various business locations around Riverside and Portland. He'd also, without my knowledge, begun documenting Patricia's own movements and discovered that she was indeed following me with systematic dedication. She's invested significant time and energy in tracking your schedule, he reported. I've observed her parked outside your workplace, following you to meetings, and positioning herself at locations where she can observe your activities. This isn't casual concern from a worried mother-in-law. This is deliberate surveillance conducted with the intent to gather information for use against you. The professional validation of what I'd suspected felt both vindicating and deeply unsettling. Patricia's behavior went far beyond normal family concern and entered territory that could reasonably be described as harassment or stalking. There's something else, Marcus continued. I've been asking discreet questions around Riverside about your mother-in-law's reputation and social connections. She's been very systematic about spreading information about your alleged affair, but she's also been gathering intelligence from multiple sources. Several people mentioned that she's asked them to keep an eye on you and report anything suspicious. The revelation that Patricia had recruited a network of informants among our neighbors and community members felt like a violation that went beyond personal betrayal. She had turned people I interacted with daily into unwitting participants in her campaign against me. Who has she approached? The grocery store manager mentioned that she'd asked him to note if you shopped at unusual times or with anyone he didn't recognize. The postal worker said she'd inquired about any changes in your mail delivery patterns. Even the secretary at Tyler's school confirmed that Patricia had asked about your involvement in school activities and whether you seemed distracted or absent during parent conferences. Each revelation painted a picture of a woman who had transformed concern into obsession, recruiting an entire community to participate in surveillance of her daughter-in-law's daily life. That weekend brought the confrontation I'd been dreading. Daniel announced that Patricia wanted to have another family discussion, this time at our house. She had information she needed to share with both of us, information that she claimed would finally resolve the questions about our marriage. What kind of information? I asked, though I already suspected what Patricia thought she had discovered. She won't say exactly, but she's been asking around town, talking to people who might have observed things. She says she has evidence that will either clear up the misunderstanding or confirm her concerns. The phrasing made it clear that Daniel believed Patricia's investigation would vindicate her suspicions rather than prove my innocence. She had successfully positioned herself as the objective seeker of truth, while casting me as the defensive wife with something to hide. Patricia arrived Sunday afternoon carrying a manila folder and wearing the expression of someone who believed she held winning cards in a poker game. She declined my offer of coffee and requested that we sit in the living room for what she described as a serious family conversation. I've been hoping this would all resolve itself, she began, her voice carrying the authority of her former profession. I've been praying that my concerns were unfounded, that there was an innocent explanation for the changes I've observed in Lauren's behavior. Daniel sat forward in his chair, clearly anxious to hear what his mother had discovered. I remained silent, knowing that anything I said would be interpreted as defensiveness or an attempt to deflect from whatever evidence Patricia was about to present. Unfortunately, she continued, opening her folder, my investigation has confirmed my worst fears. Lauren has been deceiving us all. She produced a series of photographs, clearly taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. The images showed me at various locations around Riverside and Portland, often in conversation with men she claimed were unidentified individuals. This photo shows Lauren meeting secretly with a man at Sunset Park, Patricia explained, displaying an image of me sitting in my car while talking on the phone. She told Daniel she was working, but as you can see, she's clearly having an intimate conversation with someone. The photograph was real, but Patricia's interpretation was complete fiction. I had indeed been at Sunset Park that day, conducting a conference call with the difficult client in New York. The emotional expression she was interpreting as romantic intimacy was actually professional frustration as I tried to save a failing business relationship. This one shows her having lunch with the same man at Miller's coffee shop, Patricia continued, producing the image Marcus had warned me about. They're sitting very close together, clearly engaged in personal rather than professional conversation. The photograph showed Brian Foster and me working on the Cascade Health campaign, our laptops open and business documents spread across the table. But from Patricia's distant vantage point, our collaborative work posture could be misinterpreted as intimate proximity. "And this," she said triumphantly, producing a final photograph, "shows her entering a hotel in downtown Portland with the same man. They were inside for over 2 hours." The image showed me walking into the lobby of the Marriott downtown, where I had attended a marketing conference the previous month. Brian had been there as well, representing our company at the same event. But Patricia had photographed only our arrival and created her own narrative about what our presence there meant. Daniel studied the photographs with an expression that broke my heart. I could see him trying to reconcile the images with his knowledge of my character, struggling to find innocent explanations for what Patricia was presenting as clear evidence of infidelity. "These photographs don't show what you think they show," I said carefully. "Each of these situations has a completely legitimate professional explanation." "Of course you'd say that," Patricia replied smoothly. "But the evidence speaks for itself. You've been meeting with this man regularly, spending hours together in private settings, lying to your husband about your whereabouts." "I haven't lied about anything. Every one of these occasions was work-related, and I can provide documentation to prove it." Patricia's smile was cold and satisfied. "Then you won't mind if we verify that documentation. You won't mind if we contact your employer to confirm these alleged business meetings and conference attendance." The challenge was clearly designed to intimidate me into confession. Patricia assumed that my claims of professional legitimacy were lies that would crumble under scrutiny. What she didn't know was that I had been documenting everything. That Marcus had been conducting his own investigation, and that verification would prove my innocence rather than her accusations. "I would welcome that verification," I said calmly. "In fact, I insist on it." The confidence in my voice seemed to surprise both Patricia and Daniel. I could see doubt creeping into Patricia's expression as she realized that I wasn't reacting with the guilt and panic she'd expected. "Furthermore," I continued, reaching for my own folder that I'd prepared for this moment, "I think it's time we discuss the methods you've used to gather this so-called evidence." I produced Marcus's photographs of Patricia following me, documenting her surveillance, showing her parked outside my workplace and positioned at various locations where she could observe my activities. "These images show you stalking me, Patricia. They document systematic harassment that goes far beyond normal family concern. You've been following me for weeks, recruiting neighbors to spy on me, and creating fictional narratives based on legitimate professional activities." Patricia's face flushed red as she stared at the photographs that exposed her own behavior. Daniel looked back and forth between us, clearly struggling to process the revelation that his mother had been conducting surveillance operations against his wife. "I was protecting my son," Patricia said defensively. "I was gathering evidence of behavior that threatened to destroy this family." "You were creating the very destruction you claimed to be preventing," I replied. "You've turned our marriage into a battleground based on lies and paranoia. You've recruited our entire community to participate in harassment disguised as concern." The room fell silent as the weight of mutual accusations settled between us. Patricia's carefully constructed case against me was crumbling under scrutiny, but the damage to my marriage and my relationship with Daniel felt potentially irreversible. "I want to see the documentation," Daniel said quietly. "Both of you. I want to see every piece of evidence, every explanation, every photograph and receipt and witness statement. I want the complete truth, not competing versions of reality." It was exactly what I had been hoping for. The opportunity to present objective evidence rather than defending against innuendo and speculation. Marcus had prepared a comprehensive report that would vindicate me completely, but I also knew that exposing Patricia's behavior would have consequences that extended far beyond our immediate family. "There's one more thing," I said, looking directly at Patricia. I've hired a private investigator to document the truth about my activities and your harassment. He's prepared a complete report that proves my innocence and exposes your malicious behavior. We can review it together, right now, and finally put an end to this destructive campaign you've waged against our marriage." Patricia's face went white as the implications of my statement sank in. She had assumed she was the only one conducting investigations, the only one gathering evidence and building a case. The revelation that I had been doing the same thing, with professional help and objective documentation, shifted the power dynamic completely. "You hired a private investigator to spy on your own family?" she asked, her voice shaking with outrage. "I hired a private investigator to document the truth and protect my marriage from false accusations. Just like you've been conducting your own investigation, except mine was done legally and ethically by a licensed professional." Daniel stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair in the gesture I knew meant he was overwhelmed by conflicting information and emotions. "I need to see everything," he said. "Every photograph, every report, every piece of evidence from both of you. I need to understand what's been happening in my own family without my knowledge." The moment I had been working toward had finally arrived. The truth would be revealed, not through accusations and counter-accusations, but through objective evidence gathered by a professional investigator. Patricia's campaign of rumors and speculation would be exposed for what it was, and my innocence would be proven beyond any reasonable doubt. But as I looked at Daniel's confused and hurt expression, I realized that even vindication might not be enough to repair the damage that had been done to our marriage. Trust, once broken by suspicion and manipulation, is not easily restored by evidence and explanations. The road back to the life we'd shared before Patricia's interference would be long and uncertain, regardless of what Marcus's investigation had revealed. Marcus Rodriguez arrived at our house that evening carrying a leather briefcase and an expression of professional determination. I had called him immediately after Patricia's departure, requesting an emergency meeting to present his findings to Daniel. The timing couldn't have been more crucial. My husband sat at our kitchen table, surrounded by Patricia's photographs and accusations, looking like a man drowning in conflicting versions of reality. "Mr. Hayes?" Marcus said, extending his hand to Daniel with the confidence of someone accustomed to delivering life-changing information. "I understand you have questions about your wife's activities over the past several weeks. I'm here to provide you with documented facts rather than interpretations or assumptions." Daniel shook his hand warily, clearly uncertain about having a private investigator in our home, but desperate for clarity about what had become an impossible situation. "I want to establish some ground rules before we begin," Marcus continued, settling into a chair at our dining table. "Everything I'm about to show you is factual documentation gathered through legal surveillance methods. I've been following your wife for 2 weeks, photographing her activities, and cross-referencing them with the allegations that have been made against her character." He opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder organized with colored tabs and professional documentation that made Patricia's amateur surveillance look exactly like what it was. The obsessive hobby of a woman determined to destroy her daughter-in-law's reputation. "Let's start with the allegation that your wife has been meeting secretly with a man for romantic purposes," Marcus said, producing a series of high-quality photographs. "These images show Mrs. Hayes at Sunset Park on November 15th, the date your mother claims she observed suspicious behavior. The photographs were taken from multiple angles, showing me sitting in my car with my phone pressed to my ear, clearly engaged in a business conversation. Marcus had captured images of my laptop open on the passenger seat, business documents visible through the windshield, and even a shot of me taking notes during what was obviously a professional call. The metadata on these images confirms the timestamps, and I have audio recordings of the phone conversation that prove this was a conference call with Hartman Group executives regarding a crisis management situation that threatened their advertising campaign. Daniel studied the photographs, comparing them to Patricia's distant, grainy images that had made the same scene look clandestine and romantic. "How did you get audio recordings of her phone calls?" Daniel asked. "I didn't record the calls themselves," Marcus clarified. "Mrs. Hayes provided me with her phone records and permission to contact the Hartman Group to verify the nature and duration of their business communications. They confirmed that she spent 2 hours that afternoon, preventing them from terminating their contract with Northwest Marketing Solutions." He slid a document across the table, official letterhead from the Hartman Group, signed by their CEO, thanking me for my exceptional crisis management work and confirming the exact times of our emergency consultations. "Next, let's examine the alleged secret lunch meeting at Miller's coffee shop," Marcus continued, producing another set of professional photographs. These images show Mrs. Hayes meeting with Brian Foster, her colleague at Northwest Marketing Solutions, to discuss the Cascade Health campaign. The photographs told a completely different story than Patricia's version. Marcus had captured images of our business materials spread across the table, both laptops open with presentation slides visible, and even shots of the actual work documents we'd been reviewing. Most importantly, he'd photographed other patrons in the coffee shop who could serve as witnesses to the professional nature of our meeting. "I interviewed 3 customers who were present during this meeting," Marcus said, producing signed witness statements. All confirmed that Mrs. Hayes and Mr. Foster were clearly conducting business, discussing marketing strategies, and reviewing what appeared to be budget projections and timeline documents. Daniel read through the witness statements, his expression shifting from suspicion to confusion to something that might have been relief. "Finally, the hotel meeting that your mother interpreted as evidence of an affair," Marcus said, producing the most damning counter-evidence yet. These photographs show Mrs. Hayes attending the Pacific Northwest Marketing Conference at the Portland Marriott on October 28th. The images showed me in the hotel lobby, but they also showed the conference registration desk, promotional banners advertising the marketing event, and dozens of other professionals attending the same industry gathering. Marcus had photographed the conference schedule board, my name badge, and even my participation in a panel discussion about crisis communication strategies. I have the complete conference roster showing both Mrs. Hayes and Mr. Foster as registered attendees representing Northwest Marketing Solutions, Marcus explained, producing official documentation from the event organizers. I also have testimony from conference staff confirming their professional participation and networking activities throughout the 2-day event. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. Every suspicious activity Patricia had documented had a completely legitimate professional explanation, supported by documentation, witness testimony, and objective verification from third parties. "Now let's discuss the surveillance methods used by your mother," Marcus said, his tone becoming more serious. "These photographs document her following your wife, positioning herself to observe Mrs. Hayes's activities, and conducting what can only be described as systematic stalking." The images he produced were disturbing in their thoroughness. Patricia. Parked outside my workplace at various times of day, following my car through Riverside traffic, positioned at locations where she could photograph my meetings and interactions. Marcus had documented her presence at every location where she claimed to have accidentally observed suspicious behavior. "This wasn't casual observation or coincidental encounters," Marcus explained. Mrs. Brennan conducted deliberate surveillance operations, often traveling considerable distances from her normal routines to position herself where she could monitor your wife's activities. He produced a map of Riverside with Patricia's surveillance, locations marked in red and my legitimate business activities marked in blue. The pattern showed that she had been following me systematically, not stumbling upon suspicious behavior by accident. "I also discovered that Mrs. Brennan has been soliciting information about your wife from various community members," Marcus continued, producing a list of people Patricia had approached for intelligence gathering. "The grocery store manager, postal worker, school secretary, and several neighbors have all confirmed that she asked them to report any unusual behavior or changes in Mrs. Hayes's routines. Daniel stared at the documentation in stunned silence, clearly struggling to reconcile this evidence with his image of his mother as a concerned parent protecting her family. "There's more," Marcus said gently. "I believe Mrs. Brennan's obsession with proving your wife's infidelity may stem from her own psychological issues related to loss and control. I'm not qualified to make clinical diagnoses, but the behavior patterns I've observed suggest someone who is projecting her own fears and insecurities onto your marriage." He produced a timeline showing Patricia's escalating surveillance activities, beginning shortly after the anniversary of her husband's death and intensifying around significant family events and holidays. The timing suggests that her accusations against your wife may be related to her own grief and fear of losing her remaining family connections. Rather than dealing with her emotional needs directly, she's created an external threat to focus on eliminating. The psychological analysis felt like the missing piece of a puzzle I'd been trying to solve for months. Patricia's campaign against me wasn't really about protecting Daniel from an unfaithful wife. It was about maintaining control over her son and avoiding the loneliness of her widowed life. "What are our legal options?" Daniel asked, his voice hollow with shock and disappointment. "Mrs. Brennan's behavior constitutes harassment and potentially stalking under Oregon law," Marcus replied. "You could pursue restraining orders, civil litigation for defamation, or even criminal charges depending on how you want to proceed. However, given the family relationships involved, you might want to consider less adversarial approaches first." I watched Daniel processing this information, seeing his world reshape itself around facts rather than the fiction his mother had constructed. The man I'd married was still there, but he looked older, worn down by weeks of doubt and conflicting loyalties. "I need to confront her," Daniel said finally. "I need to show her this evidence and demand an explanation for what she's been doing to our family." "Before you do that," Marcus interjected, "I recommend documenting her response. If she continues to make false accusations even when confronted with proof of her lies, it strengthens any legal case you might want to pursue later." He handed Daniel a small recording device. Oregon is a one-party consent state, which means you can legally record conversations without the other person's knowledge. If you're going to confront your mother, I suggest documenting her response to being presented with evidence of her misconduct. That night, after Marcus left and the children were asleep, Daniel and I sat in our bedroom trying to process what we'd learned. The evidence had vindicated me completely, but the emotional damage of weeks of suspicion and doubt couldn't be erased by photographs and witness statements. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I doubted you. I'm sorry I let her poison our marriage with her lies." The apology was necessary but insufficient. Trust, once fractured by suspicion, requires more than evidence to repair. We would need time, counseling, and probably professional help to rebuild what Patricia's campaign had damaged. "I understand why you had doubts," I said carefully. "Your mother is very convincing, and she knows exactly how to manipulate your love and loyalty to her advantage. But Daniel, this can't happen again. You can't let anyone, not even your mother, come between us like this." "It won't," he promised. "Tomorrow I'm going to show her everything Marcus documented. I'm going to demand that she stop spreading lies about you and apologize to everyone in this community for the rumors she's created." The next morning, Daniel called Patricia and requested an emergency meeting at her house. He told her he had important information about my alleged affair that needed to be discussed immediately. She agreed eagerly, probably assuming he was ready to confront me with additional evidence or perhaps even discuss divorce proceedings. I stayed home with the children, monitoring Daniel's location through our shared phone app and waiting for updates about the confrontation that would determine the future of our family relationships. Daniel arrived at Patricia's house armed with Marcus's complete file and the recording device hidden in his jacket pocket. Patricia greeted him with the satisfied expression of someone who believed her campaign had finally succeeded in opening her son's eyes to his wife's deception. "I'm so glad you're finally ready to face the truth about Lauren," she said, leading him into her living room. "I know this is painful, but you deserve better than a wife who lies and cheats and puts her own selfish desires ahead of her family's needs." "I am ready to face the truth," Daniel replied, activating the recording device. "But maybe not the truth you think I am." He began by laying out Marcus's photographs side by side with Patricia's amateur surveillance images, showing her the stark contrast between professional documentation and her twisted interpretations of innocent activities. "This photo you took at Sunset Park shows Lauren on a business call with the Hartman Group," Daniel explained, his voice steady despite the emotional difficulty of confronting his mother's lies. "I have verified documentation from the company, confirming the crisis management work she was doing that afternoon." Patricia's confident expression began to waver as she realized that her evidence was being systematically dismantled with professional documentation. "Your photo from Miller's coffee shop shows Lauren meeting with her colleague Brian Foster to work on the Cascade Health campaign," Daniel continued. "I have witness statements from other customers confirming they were conducting business, not having a romantic encounter." "Those witnesses could be lying," Patricia protested weakly. "They could be covering for her. 3 independent witnesses who don't even know Lauren personally, all lying to protect someone they've never met?" Daniel's voice carried the first hint of anger. "Or is it more likely that you saw what you wanted to see because you were determined to prove something that isn't true?" He showed her the hotel conference documentation, the professional verification letters, the timeline of legitimate business activities that corresponded exactly with her surveillance observations. "Every single allegation you've made against my wife has been proven false," Daniel said, his voice growing stronger. "But more importantly, I have evidence of what you've been doing to gather your so-called proof." He produced Marcus's photographs of Patricia following me, documenting her surveillance activities, showing her positioned at locations where she could spy on my activities. "You've been stalking my wife, Mom. You've been following her around town, recruiting neighbors to spy on her, and spreading vicious lies based on your twisted interpretations of completely innocent activities." Patricia stared at the photographs of her own surveillance activities, her face cycling through shock, anger, and something that might have been shame. "I was protecting you," she said defensively. "I was trying to save your marriage from a woman who was deceiving you." "You were destroying my marriage," Daniel replied firmly. "You were creating the very problems you claimed to be solving. You turned our entire community against Lauren based on lies and paranoia." "She's changed you," Patricia said, her voice taking on a desperate quality. "Ever since you married her, you've been different. More distant, less available to your family. She's pulled you away from the people who really love you." The accusation revealed the true motivation behind Patricia's campaign. This wasn't really about protecting Daniel from an unfaithful wife. It was about competing with me for his attention and loyalty. "Mom, I'm a grown man with a wife and children. It's normal and healthy for my primary loyalty to be to the family I've created, not the family I grew up in. Lauren hasn't changed me. Marriage changed me, and that's exactly what was supposed to happen." "But we used to be so close," Patricia pleaded. "We used to talk every day, spend time together, share everything. Now I feel like I hardly know you." "We can still be close, but not at the expense of my marriage. And definitely not by destroying my wife's reputation with lies and harassment." Daniel played back portions of the recorded conversation, letting Patricia hear her own words admitting to surveillance and expressing motivations that had nothing to do with protecting her son's welfare. "This recording, along with all the evidence Marcus gathered, proves that you've engaged in systematic harassment of my wife," Daniel said. "You could face legal consequences for what you've done, restraining orders, defamation lawsuits, even criminal charges for stalking." Patricia's face went white as the potential consequences of her actions became clear. She had been so focused on proving my alleged infidelity that she hadn't considered the legal and social repercussions of her own behavior. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice small and defeated. "I want you to stop," Daniel said firmly. "I want you to stop following my wife, stop spreading rumors about her, stop recruiting people to spy on our family. I want you to publicly acknowledge that your accusations were false and apologize to Lauren for the damage you've caused. And if I refuse, then I'll pursue every legal remedy available to protect my family from your harassment. I'll get restraining orders, file defamation lawsuits, and press criminal charges if necessary. And I'll make sure everyone in Riverside knows exactly what you've been doing and why." The ultimatum hung in the air between them, the end result of months of escalating conflict that had finally reached its inevitable conclusion. Patricia had overplayed her hand, pushing her campaign against me so far that she'd exposed herself to legal consequences and social humiliation. "I need time to think," Patricia said finally. "You have 24 hours, Daniel replied. "After that, Lauren and I will decide how to proceed based on whether you're willing to make this right or if we need to pursue legal protection from your harassment." Daniel left his mother's house with the recording device full of damaging admissions and a folder of evidence that could destroy Patricia's reputation as thoroughly as she had tried to destroy mine. The power dynamic in our family conflict had shifted completely, and Patricia now faced the same social and legal consequences she had tried to inflict on me. That evening, as we waited for Patricia's response to Daniel's ultimatum, I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. The truth had been revealed and my innocence proven, but the cost to our family relationships would be permanent. Even if Patricia apologized and stopped her harassment, the trust between us was irreparably broken. "Do you think she'll agree to apologize publicly?" I asked Daniel as we prepared for bed. "I think she'll do whatever it takes to avoid legal consequences and public humiliation," he replied. "But whether her apology will be sincere or just damage control remains to be seen." The next 24 hours would determine whether Patricia was willing to acknowledge her mistakes and work toward repairing the damage she'd caused, or whether she would continue her destructive campaign and force us to pursue legal remedies that would permanently fracture our family relationships. Either way, the truth was finally in the open, and I no longer had to defend myself against shadows and whispers. The private investigator Patricia's paranoia had made necessary had become the instrument of her own exposure, proving beyond any doubt that sometimes the best defense against false accusations is simply the documented truth. Patricia's call came at 7:30 the next morning, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. She demanded that Daniel come to her house immediately for what she called a final discussion about our family's future. When he hesitated, she added that she had spoken with several people overnight and had important information that would change everything. Daniel looked at me across our breakfast table, both of us recognizing the tone of someone who had spent sleepless hours plotting rather than reflecting. Patricia wasn't calling to apologize or accept responsibility. She was preparing for one, last offensive in her war against our marriage. "I'm going with you," I announced, surprising Daniel with my decision. "Whatever she has planned, whatever new accusations or twisted evidence she thinks she's discovered, I want to face it directly. No more secondhand reports or filtered conversations." Daniel nodded grimly, understanding that this confrontation would determine whether our family could move forward or whether Patricia's obsession would require legal intervention to stop. We drove to Hillcrest Drive in silence, both lost in thoughts about how drastically our lives had changed in just a few weeks. The tree-lined street where Patricia lived looked peaceful in the morning light, giving no hint of the drama that had been unfolding behind the well-maintained facades of Riverside's most established neighborhood. Patricia answered her door wearing her best church dress and the expression of righteous determination that had served her well during 3 decades of managing difficult students and parents. She had clearly prepared for this meeting with the same tactical precision she'd once applied to parent-teacher conferences with hostile families. "Lauren," she said with icy politeness, "I wasn't expecting you to join us. This conversation concerns matters between Daniel and myself." "Actually," I replied, stepping into her foyer without invitation, "this conversation concerns lies that have been told about me, rumors that have damaged my reputation, and harassment that has affected my daily life. I think I have every right to be present." Patricia's jaw tightened, but she led us into her formal living room where she had arranged several chairs facing a small table covered with documents, photographs, and what appeared to be handwritten notes. "I've spent considerable time since yesterday's conversation thinking about the accusations you've made against me," Patricia began, addressing Daniel while pointedly ignoring my presence. "I've also spoken with several community members who have information that puts your wife's activities in a very different light." She gestured to the materials on her table like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. "What you interpreted as harassment was actually concerned investigation by multiple people who care about this family's welfare. I wasn't the only one who noticed changes in Lauren's behavior and questioned what they might mean." Daniel leaned forward, his expression skeptical but willing to hear what his mother claimed to have discovered. "Carol Jensen has been keeping detailed notes about the unusual visitors Lauren has been receiving at your house," Patricia continued, producing a small notebook filled with Carol's careful handwriting. "Men arriving at odd hours, staying for extended periods while you were at work, leaving through the back door to avoid being seen from the street." The accusation was so outrageous that I actually laughed, which seemed to infuriate Patricia even more. "You find it amusing that your neighbor has documented evidence of your extramarital activities," she demanded, finally acknowledging my presence. "I find it amusing that you've convinced Carol to spy on my house and create fiction about maintenance workers, delivery drivers, and repair technicians," I replied calmly. "Would you like me to provide receipts for the plumber who fixed our kitchen sink, the cable technician who upgraded our internet service, and the appliance repairman who serviced our washing machine?" Patricia's confidence wavered slightly, but she pressed forward with her prepared presentation. "Mrs. Henderson observed you meeting with the same unidentified man on 3 separate occasions at different locations around town," she said, producing photographs that were even grainier and more distant than her previous surveillance efforts. "These meetings always occurred during times when you claimed to be working. Yet there's clearly a personal intimacy between you that goes beyond any professional relationship." I studied the photographs, recognizing myself in 2 of them, but completely unable to identify the supposed mystery man Patricia claimed I was meeting. The images were taken from such distances and at such poor resolution that they could have shown me talking to anyone about anything. "Patricia," I said patiently, "these photographs are so unclear that you can't even prove they show me talking to the same person, much less demonstrate that our conversations were romantic rather than professional." "The body language is obvious to anyone with eyes," Patricia shot back. "The way you're standing, the length of these conversations, the secretive locations you chose for these meetings." Daniel studied the photographs with increasing frustration, clearly unable to see the romantic intimacy his mother claimed was evident in the blurry, distant images. "Mom, these pictures don't prove anything except that Lauren talks to people as part of her job. You're asking me to destroy my marriage based on shadows and speculation." Patricia's face flushed red with anger and desperation. She was losing control of the narrative she'd worked so hard to construct, and her response revealed the depth of her obsession with proving my guilt. "Fine," she snapped, reaching for a manila envelope that had been sitting apart from her other materials. "If you won't believe photographic evidence, if you won't trust the observations of people who have known this family for decades, then maybe you'll believe this." She withdrew a document that made my blood run cold. A contract with a private investigation firm different from Marcus Rodriguez's company. Patricia had hired her own professional investigator, someone who might have been more willing to find evidence that supported her predetermined conclusions. Reynolds Security Solutions has been conducting surveillance on your wife for the past 10 days, Patricia announced triumphantly. They specialize in matrimonial investigations, and they have documentation that will finally prove what I've been trying to tell you. Daniel stared at the contract, clearly shocked that his mother had escalated her campaign to include professional surveillance services. You hired a private investigator to spy on my wife? I hired professionals to gather objective evidence about activities that were destroying our family, Patricia corrected him, and they found exactly what I suspected they would find. She reached for her phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be a digital report from Reynolds Security Solutions. They have photographs of Lauren entering a residence that doesn't belong to any known business contact, Patricia said, showing Daniel images on her phone screen. They have documentation of her spending over 3 hours at this location on 2 separate occasions, always during times when she claimed to be working late at the office. My heart sank as I recognized the location in the photographs. The house belonged to Stephanie Walsh, my closest friend, where I had spent several evenings over the past 2 weeks discussing the crisis with Patricia and seeking emotional support during the most difficult period of my marriage. They also have evidence that she's been receiving personal phone calls from an unidentified male caller, always answered in private locations away from her workplace or home. Patricia continued, her voice gaining strength as she sensed that this new evidence was having the impact she'd hoped for. The phone calls were from Marcus Rodriguez, updating me on his investigation and coordinating our strategy for exposing Patricia's harassment. But taken out of context and presented without explanation, I could see how they might appear suspicious to someone determined to find evidence of infidelity. Furthermore, Patricia said, producing printed emails from her phone, they have documented communications between Lauren and this same individual that suggest a relationship that goes far beyond professional consultation. She handed Daniel printouts of email exchanges that had clearly been obtained through questionable means. The messages were indeed from Marcus, but they had been selectively edited to remove context and create the impression of personal intimacy rather than professional collaboration. Daniel read through the manipulated communications with a growing expression of confusion and hurt. Without the context of Marcus's role as our private investigator, the messages could be interpreted as evidence of an inappropriate relationship. How did you get copies of my wife's private emails? Daniel asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Patricia's triumphant expression faltered slightly as she realized she might have revealed the illegal methods her investigators had used to gather their evidence. Reynolds Security Solutions has access to sophisticated investigative tools, she said evasively. They specialize in uncovering information that people try to hide. They hacked into my email account, I said flatly. What they've shown you is evidence obtained through illegal electronic surveillance, which means none of it can be used in any legal proceeding. Patricia waved away my objection dismissively. Legal technicalities don't change the facts about your behavior. These emails prove that you've been in constant communication with another man, meeting him at private locations, lying to your husband about your activities. Those emails are from Marcus Rodriguez, the private investigator we hired to document your harassment, I explained, watching Patricia's face cycle through confusion, denial, and finally desperate calculation. That's convenient, she said acidly. Of course you'd claim that any evidence against you was related to some fictional investigation of me. Daniel held up his hand for silence, his expression indicating that he'd reached the limit of his patience with competing accusations and contradictory evidence. Both of you need to stop, he said firmly. Mom, you've hired 2 different private investigators to spy on my wife. You've obtained her private communications through illegal hacking. You've recruited neighbors to conduct surveillance on our home. This isn't concerned family protection. This is obsessive harassment that's gone far beyond any reasonable boundary. Patricia opened her mouth to protest, but Daniel continued before she could speak. And Lauren, I need you to provide me with complete documentation about Marcus Rodriguez and his investigation. I need to verify everything you've told me about his work and his communications with you. I need proof that contradicts what Mom's investigators have claimed to find." I nodded, understanding that Daniel was trying to navigate between conflicting versions of reality presented by the two women he was supposed to trust most in the world. "I can provide complete documentation," I said. "Marcus's contract, his daily reports, his photographic evidence, witness statements, and verification from every business contact he investigated. Everything he discovered is documented and verifiable through independent sources." Patricia sensed that her new evidence was failing to have the decisive impact she'd hoped for, and her desperation began to show in increasingly wild accusations. "She's manipulated you," Patricia told Daniel, her voice rising with hysteria. "She's convinced you that everyone who questions her behavior is wrong, that multiple independent witnesses are all lying, that professional investigators are all mistaken. She's isolated you from your family and turned you against people who have loved you your entire life." The accusation of manipulation was particularly rich, coming from someone who had spent months conducting psychological warfare against her daughter-in-law, but I recognized the technique Patricia was using. When direct evidence fails, attack the victim's credibility and suggest that questioning the accusations is itself proof of deception. "Mom," Daniel said wearily, "you're asking me to believe that Lauren is so skilled at deception that she can fool private investigators, manipulate business associates into providing false testimony, and convince complete strangers to lie on her behalf. Does that really seem more likely than the possibility that you've been wrong about her activities?" Patricia's response revealed the depth of her delusion and the extent to which she'd convinced herself that reality itself was wrong, rather than accepting that her suspicions were unfounded. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I think she's exactly that manipulative, exactly that skilled at deception. I think she's been playing a long game to isolate you from your family and destroy everything we've built together." The room fell silent as the true scope of Patricia's paranoia became clear. She wasn't just accusing me of having an affair. She was constructing an elaborate conspiracy theory in which I was a master manipulator, capable of orchestrating a complex deception involving dozens of unwitting participants. Daniel stared at his mother with a mixture of sadness and horror, finally understanding that her accusations weren't based on evidence or reasonable suspicion, but on psychological issues that required professional intervention rather than family discussion. "Mom, you need help," he said gently. "This level of suspicion, this willingness to believe that everyone is lying except you, this obsession with proving something that isn't true, it's not healthy. It's not rational." Patricia's face contorted, with rage at the suggestion that her concerns were psychological rather than factual. "Don't you dare suggest that I'm mentally unstable because I'm trying to protect my son from a lying, cheating wife," she snarled. "I'm the only one in this family who has the courage to face the truth about what she really is." "The truth," I said quietly, "is that you've hired illegal surveillance, obtained private communications through hacking, recruited neighbors to spy on my family, and spent months spreading lies about my character because you can't accept that. Your son is happily married to someone you didn't choose for him." Patricia turned on me with fury that had been building for months of failed attempts to prove her accusations. "The truth is that you're a selfish, manipulative woman who married my son for security and convenience while planning to destroy him with your infidelity. The truth is that you've been meeting with other men, lying about your activities, and laughing at how easily you fooled everyone who trusted you." "That's enough," Daniel said, standing up abruptly. "Mom, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. I've seen Marcus Rodriguez's evidence. I've verified Lauren's activities independently. I've confirmed her business meetings, her professional commitments, and her legitimate explanations for everything you've twisted into evidence of infidelity." He pulled out his phone and showed Patricia the comprehensive documentation Marcus had provided, including business correspondence, witness statements, and professional verification of every activity she'd claimed was suspicious. Every single accusation you've made has been proven false. Every piece of evidence you've presented has been contradicted by objective documentation. Every witness who supports your claims has been shown to be mistaken or deliberately misled. Patricia stared at the documentation with the expression of someone whose entire worldview was crumbling around her. "But if she's not having an affair," she said slowly, "then everything I've done. Everything you've done has been based on lies you've told yourself, because you couldn't accept that Daniel's primary loyalty belongs to his wife and children rather than to you," I said, not unkindly, but without sparing her feelings. Patricia sank into her chair as the full scope of her mistakes became clear. She had destroyed her relationship with her son, damaged her reputation in the community, and potentially exposed herself to legal consequences, all in service of proving accusations that were completely false. "I was protecting my family," she whispered, but the words lacked conviction. "You were destroying it," Daniel replied. "And now you need to decide whether you're going to take responsibility for what you've done and try to make amends, or whether you're going to continue down this path until it results in restraining orders and criminal charges." The ultimatum was clear, and Patricia understood that her choices had been reduced to accepting responsibility or facing legal consequences that would permanently separate her from her son and grandchildren. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice small and defeated. "I want you to publicly acknowledge that your accusations against Lauren were false," Daniel said. "I want you to apologize to everyone you've involved in spreading rumors about her character. I want you to compensate her for the professional services she had to hire to defend against your harassment. And I want you to agree to family counseling to address the issues that led to this situation." Patricia looked at the documentation spread across her table, evidence of months of obsessive behavior that had accomplished nothing except damaging the relationships she claimed to be protecting. "And if I refuse, then Lauren and I will pursue every legal remedy available to us: restraining orders, defamation lawsuits, criminal charges for harassment and illegal surveillance. We'll make sure everyone in Riverside knows exactly what you've been doing and why. Your reputation will be destroyed as thoroughly as you tried to destroy Lauren's." The threat was delivered calmly, but with absolute certainty. Patricia had pushed the situation past the point where family loyalty could protect her from the consequences of her actions. She sat in silence for several minutes, processing the complete collapse of her campaign against me and the stark choice Daniel had presented. Finally, she looked up with tears in her eyes and nodded slowly. "I'll do whatever you think is necessary to fix this," she said. "I'll apologize publicly. I'll retract everything I've said about Lauren. I'll pay for whatever expenses this has caused your family." The concession felt like a victory, but I knew that rebuilding trust after such extensive betrayal would require more than apologies and compensation. Patricia had revealed aspects of her character that couldn't be unseen, and our family relationships would never return to their previous state of naive trust. "We'll draw up a formal agreement outlining the specific steps you need to take," Daniel said. "And Mom, if you violate any aspect of that agreement, if you resume spreading rumors or conducting surveillance or interfering in our marriage in any way, we won't give you another chance to make things right." Patricia nodded, understanding that she had used up all the goodwill her maternal relationship had earned her. Any future misconduct would result in immediate legal action and permanent estrangement from her son's family. As we prepared to leave her house, Patricia made one final attempt to justify her behavior. "I really believed I was protecting you," she said to Daniel. "I really thought she was betraying our family." "I know you believed it," Daniel replied sadly. "But belief without evidence isn't protection. It's paranoia, and paranoia destroys the very relationships it claims to protect." The drive home was quiet, both of us exhausted by months of conflict and the emotional toll of exposing family secrets that should never have existed. Patricia's surrender felt like the end of a war, but wars leave casualties that take time to heal. The reckoning was complete, but the real work of rebuilding our marriage and family relationships was just beginning. The formal apology came on. A cold December morning, delivered to my workplace in an envelope marked with Patricia's careful handwriting. Inside was a 2-page letter addressed to the staff and management of Northwest Marketing Solutions, acknowledging that she had spread false information about my character and requesting that anyone who had heard her accusations disregard them completely. The letter was professionally written, likely reviewed by the family counselor Daniel had insisted Patricia see before any reconciliation could begin. But beneath the careful language, I could sense the deep resentment of someone forced to publicly admit she had been wrong about something she'd believed with absolute certainty. Brian Foster found me reading the letter in my office, my coffee growing cold as I processed the surreal experience of holding my mother-in-law's written confession of defamation. "Is that what I think it is?" he asked, settling into the chair, across from my desk. "Patricia's formal retraction of every lie she told about me having an affair," I replied, handing him the letter. "She's sending copies to everyone in Riverside who might have heard her rumors, along with a request that they disregard anything negative she may have said about my marriage or character." Brian read through the document with the expression of someone witnessing a rare form of justice being served. "This must feel incredible," he said. "Complete vindication, public acknowledgement that you were innocent all along." I considered his words carefully, trying to identify exactly what I was feeling. Relief was certainly part of it, along with satisfaction that the truth had finally been established beyond any doubt. But there was also a profound sadness about the permanent damage to family relationships, and the realization that some betrayals leave scars that never fully heal. "It feels complicated," I admitted. "I'm glad the lies have been publicly corrected, but I can't forget that Daniel's mother was willing to destroy my reputation based on nothing more than her own paranoid fantasies. The past 3 weeks had been a careful dance of rebuilding trust while establishing new boundaries that would prevent similar crises in the future. Daniel and I had started couples counseling with Dr. Rebecca Chen, a therapist who specialized in helping families recover from betrayal and manipulation. Dr. Chen had helped us understand that Patricia's campaign against me wasn't really about protecting Daniel from an unfaithful wife. It was about a lonely widow's desperate attempt to maintain control over her adult son and avoid confronting her own grief and isolation. Patricia's accusations served multiple psychological functions, Dr. Chen had explained during one of our sessions. They gave her a sense of purpose and importance. They justified her intrusive behavior as protective rather than controlling, and they allowed her to avoid dealing with her own emotional needs by focusing on an external threat to eliminate. Understanding the psychology behind Patricia's behavior helped explain her actions, but it didn't excuse the damage she'd caused or make forgiveness any easier to achieve. The community response to Patricia's retractions had been mixed, but mostly positive. Many of our neighbors expressed embarrassment about believing and spreading rumors without verification. Others seemed disappointed to lose a juicy piece of gossip that had entertained them for months. Carol Jensen had appeared at our front door 2 days after receiving Patricia's letter, tears streaming down her face as she apologized for her role in surveillance and rumor spreading. "I thought I was helping a friend," she'd sobbed on our doorstep. "Patricia seemed so worried about Daniel, and she asked me to keep an eye on things while she was concerned about your marriage. I never meant to hurt anyone." I'd accepted Carol's apology, understanding that Patricia had skillfully manipulated people's natural concern for family welfare into a network of unwitting accomplices. But I'd also made it clear that any future gossip or surveillance would result in immediate legal action. The most challenging aspect of recovery had been helping Chloe and Tyler understand why their grandmother had behaved so badly, without completely destroying their relationship with her. Family counseling sessions that included the children had focused on age-appropriate explanations of adult conflicts and the importance of healthy boundaries in family relationships. Grandma Patricia made some very serious mistakes because she was afraid of losing the people she loves, I'd explained to them during one particularly difficult conversation. Sometimes when adults are scared or sad, they make choices that hurt other people, even when they think they're doing the right thing. Chloe, now 15 and increasingly sophisticated in her understanding of adult relationships, had processed the situation with remarkable maturity. So Grandma lied about you having a boyfriend because she wanted Dad to pay more attention to her? She'd asked, with the directness that only teenagers can manage. That's a simplified version, but essentially, yes, I'd replied. She was lonely and afraid, and instead of asking for help with those feelings, she created a crisis that she thought would bring Dad closer to her. Tyler, at 12, had been more confused than angry about the situation. His main concern was whether Patricia would still be his grandmother and whether family holidays would continue as they always had. "We'll still see Grandma Patricia," Daniel had assured him, "but there will be new rules about how she treats our family. She'll need to show us that she can respect our boundaries and be honest in her communication." The new rules had been formalized. In a family agreement drafted by Thomas Klein, the attorney we'd consulted about potential legal action against Patricia. The document outlined specific behaviors that were prohibited, consequences for violations, and requirements for ongoing family counseling participation. Patricia was forbidden from conducting any form of surveillance on our family, soliciting information about our activities from third parties, or making accusations about our marriage without concrete evidence. She was required to attend individual therapy to address her grief and control issues, and any future contact with our family would be supervised and limited until she demonstrated consistent, respectful behavior. The agreement also included financial compensation for the legal fees, counseling costs, and professional services we'd incurred defending against her harassment. Patricia had liquidated some investments to cover these expenses, a concrete acknowledgement of the real-world consequences of her actions. Patricia had liquidated some investments to cover these expenses, a concrete acknowledgement of the real-world consequences of her actions. Christmas had approached with careful negotiations about how to handle family traditions in the wake of our crisis. Patricia had requested permission to host her annual Christmas Eve dinner, promising that she would follow all the behavioral guidelines and make no references to recent conflicts. Daniel and I had discussed the request extensively, weighing the benefits of maintaining some family normalcy for the children against the risk of providing Patricia with opportunities to resume her manipulative behavior. "I think we should try," Daniel had said during one of our evening conversations, "but with clear boundaries and an immediate exit plan if she violates the agreement in any way." The Christmas Eve dinner had been awkward but successful in its limited goals. Patricia had been formally polite, but distant, clearly struggling to navigate the new dynamic where she couldn't control or manipulate family interactions. The children had enjoyed seeing their extended family, but they'd also noticed the tension that now existed between their parents and grandmother. After dinner, as we prepared to leave, Patricia had asked for a private moment with me. Daniel had initially objected, concerned about leaving us alone together, but I'd agreed to the conversation with the understanding that he would remain within earshot. "I want you to know that I realize how wrong I was," Patricia had said, her voice carefully controlled. "I want you to know that I understand the damage I caused to your reputation, your marriage, and your sense of security in this community." The apology had seemed genuine, but I'd remained cautious about accepting it completely. "I appreciate you saying that, Patricia, but understanding that you were wrong and taking responsibility for changing the behaviors that led to this crisis are two different things." "I know," she'd replied. "Dr. Morrison has been helping me understand why I became so obsessed with proving you were unfaithful." She says it had more to do with my own fears about losing Daniel than any real evidence of problems in your marriage. Dr. Morrison was the therapist Patricia had been required to see as part of our family agreement. Her willingness to engage seriously with therapy had been one of the few encouraging signs in an otherwise difficult recovery process. The hardest part, Patricia had continued, is accepting that I nearly destroyed the very relationships I was trying to protect. I nearly lost my son and grandchildren because I couldn't deal with my own loneliness and need for control. The admission had represented genuine insight, but I'd known that insight alone wouldn't prevent future problems without consistent therapeutic work and ongoing accountability. As winter turned to spring, our family had slowly developed new patterns of interaction that acknowledged both our desire to maintain relationships and our need for protection from future manipulation. Patricia's visits were scheduled in advance and limited in duration. Her interactions with the children were supervised, and any concerning behavior was addressed immediately through family counseling sessions. The most significant change had been in Daniel's relationship with his mother. He'd always been the dutiful son, accepting her advice and deferring to her judgment in many areas of his life. The revelation of her harassment campaign had forced him to reevaluate their dynamic and establish adult boundaries that prioritized his nuclear family over his mother's emotional needs. "I love my mother," he'd explained to Dr. Chen during one of our sessions, "but I can't allow her to damage my marriage or manipulate my children. She needs to find healthier ways to deal with her loneliness that don't involve controlling other people's lives." The boundary setting had been painful for both Daniel and Patricia, but it had been necessary for protecting our family from future crises. Patricia had struggled to accept her reduced role in our lives, but her therapy work was gradually helping her understand why these changes were necessary. By summer, we'd established a routine that provided some family connection while maintaining the safety boundaries we needed. Patricia joined us for monthly family dinners at neutral locations, participated in supervised visits with the children, and attended family counseling sessions designed to improve communication and prevent future conflicts. The children had adapted to the new normal with resilience that sometimes surprised me. They understood that their grandmother had made serious mistakes, but that our family was working to heal and move forward together. They'd learned valuable lessons about healthy relationships, appropriate boundaries, and the importance of addressing conflicts honestly, rather than allowing them to fester into destructive patterns. My relationship with Patricia remained complicated and would probably never return to the polite cordiality we'd maintained before her campaign against me. 2. Much trust had been broken. Too many lies had been told, and too much damage had been done for us to pretend that nothing had changed. But we'd found a way to coexist peacefully for the sake of Daniel and the children. Patricia's consistent therapy attendance and her genuine efforts to respect our boundaries had created space for cautious reconciliation, even if full forgiveness remained beyond my emotional capacity. The most profound transformation had been in my own sense of self and my understanding of what I was willing to tolerate in relationships. The experience of being systematically targeted by someone who should have been an ally had taught me valuable lessons about standing up for myself and refusing to accept blame for other people's psychological issues. "I think this experience, as horrible as it was, has made you stronger," Stephanie had observed during one of our regular coffee meetings. "You're more confident, more willing to set boundaries, more comfortable advocating for yourself." She was right. Before Patricia's harassment campaign, I might have tried to accommodate her concerns, modify my behavior to address her complaints, or take responsibility for improving our relationship despite her unreasonable demands. The crisis had taught me that some people's problems can't be solved by changing your own behavior, and that enabling destructive patterns often makes them worse rather than better. A year after the crisis began, Daniel and I had renewed our wedding vows in a small ceremony attended by close friends and supportive family members. The renewal wasn't because our marriage had been in danger, but because we wanted to publicly reaffirm our commitment after weathering such a serious challenge to our relationship. Patricia had been invited to attend but had declined, sending a thoughtful card expressing her support for our marriage and her regrets about the difficulties she'd caused. Her absence had been both sad and appropriate, acknowledging that some damage takes longer to heal than others. During the renewal ceremony, I'd looked out at the faces of people who had supported us through the crisis. Marcus Rodriguez, who had provided the evidence that saved our marriage, Brian Foster, who had vouched for my professional integrity, Stephanie, who had offered emotional support when I'd felt most isolated, and Dr. Chen, whose therapeutic guidance had helped us rebuild trust and communication. The ceremony had felt like a celebration, not just of our marriage, but of our ability to overcome attempts to destroy it through lies, manipulation, and psychological warfare. We'd proven that truth, properly documented and professionally verified, could triumph over even the most persistent campaigns of defamation. As I'd spoken my renewed vows to Daniel, I'd felt gratitude for the strength we'd found together and the clarity we'd gained about what we would and wouldn't accept in our relationships going forward. Patricia's campaign had inadvertently strengthened our marriage by forcing us to examine and defend what we valued most about our life together. The children had served as witnesses to our renewal ceremony, symbolizing our commitment to protecting and nurturing the family we'd created together. They'd learned that marriages could survive serious challenges when partners support each other against external threats, and that families could heal from betrayal when everyone commits to honesty and healthy communication. 2 years later, as I write this account of our family crisis and recovery, Patricia remains in our lives, but in a carefully managed way that protects everyone involved. She's continued her therapy work and has made genuine progress in addressing the loneliness and control issues that led to her harassment campaign. She's developed friendships with women her own age, become involved in community volunteer work that gives her a sense of purpose, and learned to find fulfillment that doesn't depend on managing other people's lives. Her relationship with Daniel has slowly improved as she's demonstrated consistent respect for our family boundaries. The experience taught all of us valuable lessons about the importance of addressing psychological issues directly rather than allowing them to manifest as attacks on innocent family members. It reinforced the value of professional help when family conflicts escalate beyond normal disagreements into patterns of harassment or manipulation. Most importantly, it proved that truth has power when properly documented and professionally verified. Patricia's campaign might have succeeded if we'd relied only on personal testimony and family loyalty to defend against her accusations. Marcus Rodriguez's objective investigation provided the irrefutable evidence needed to expose her lies and protect our family from further damage. The private investigator Patricia never intended to hire became the instrument of her own exposure, proving that sometimes the best response to false accusations is simply documented truth. When people are determined to find evidence of wrongdoing that doesn't exist, they often reveal more about their own character than about the people they're trying to destroy. Our family emerged stronger from this crisis, with better communication, skills, clearer boundaries, and deeper appreciation for the relationships that truly matter. We learned that love without accountability isn't really love at all, and that protecting people from the consequences of their harmful behavior often enables them to become more destructive rather than helping them change. Patricia's transformation from hostile adversary to cautiously respectful family member didn't happen overnight, and it required consistent therapeutic work, genuine accountability, and ongoing supervision to maintain. But it proved that even seriously damaged family relationships can be rebuilt when everyone involved commits to honesty, professional help, and respect for healthy boundaries. The rumor mill that had once buzzed with speculation about my alleged infidelity now occasionally mentions our family's recovery as an example of how serious conflicts can be resolved through professional intervention and genuine commitment to change. We've become proof that truth, properly documented and courageously defended, can triumph over even the most persistent campaigns of lies and manipulation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, You won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.